Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the newest album from the Arkells called Morning Report. You know, I've been both anticipating and dreading this album. More specifically, I've been anticipating and dreading this review, because for as much as I'm a fan of Canadian rock group the Arkells, I haven't exactly been wild about their creative decisions over the past couple of years. The 2014 album High Noon went straight for more synthetic territory, de-emphasizing the rougher bass lines and distortion in favor of gleaming textures and drum machines, which to me felt like the exact opposite direction one should take with a more political and self-serious subject matter. Just didn't come together all that well. Now that didn't mean there weren't some great songs there. Hell, Crawling Through the Window made my list of my favorite songs of 2014. That song holds up to this day, but as a whole, High Noon just didn't hold up to the melodic groove and fast-paced heaviness that I really liked about their first two albums. And that didn't look like it was changing on their newest album, Morning Report. Opening singles are sliding even further towards pop and slamming all the more plastic and slick, especially with the lead-off singles like Private School, which sent up a lot of big red flags for me. Granted, that wasn't a guarantee things were going completely off the rails. After all, my favorite songs from High Noon have been deep cuts, even if Leather Jacket was a pretty sweet single, but I did have a fair number of hefty reservations going into Morning Report. Were they justified? Well, that depends a lot on what you were expecting from this album, cause yeah, it's a lot more of a pop release and it's got all the slick trappings that comes with it, from the writing to the instrumentation to the production. And as I have said in the past, this isn't inherently a bad idea if the band can make something out of it that's unique or punchy, and yet way too much of this album feels midway between what both the Wombats and the 1975 have done and done better over the past 18 months, and this time without even the track standouts that helped me get through High Noon. And the exasperating thing is that many of the problems are just holdovers from that album, less outright failures, but persistent miscalculations that haven't been fixed and have occurred ever since the band made their pop pivot. And again, that doesn't make the album bad, it's still decent, but it does mean that it's easily the Arkells' least compelling album to date, at least for me. So unsurprisingly, those are some pretty loaded criticisms, so let's start off with our frontman Max Kerman. And I don't really have a lot of complaints here. One thing that I've appreciated in recent years is that the Arkells have shied away from piling on effects onto Kerman's voice to emphasize the synthetic pop sign, and his wilder, more expressive delivery gives these songs a fair bit more personality than you would expect. Now, of the four producers that worked on this album, you can definitely tell who's more comfortable with the voice. Brian West's production on Private School definitely does not do him any favors by emphasizing his more nasal tone, but overall Kerman can drive a lot of these songs pretty well, with the exception of his falsetto. Now, look, I appreciate trying something outside of your comfort zone, but if you were taking inspiration from Lana Del Rey for Passenger Seat as you described in an interview, trying for a falsetto where you're not quite on key, that's the last thing that you want to imitate here, man. Now granted, that's a relatively minor issue compared to the production as a whole. And again, I feel like I have to emphasize that even though I've always liked Arkells more when they were a rock act, I don't have an issue with the choice to use more keyboards. They did so on Michigan Left too. My problem is that the synth tones they chose here nearly always clash really badly with the rest of the mix, like the oddly flat tone on Private School, or the very shrill tone layered over the hook on My Heart's Always Yours, or the gummy synths layered over Savannah and Round that get buzzy on the outro, or the tone drizzled over the mix on Hung Up, or that fizzy tone that was completely unneeded on A Little Rain, a song for Pete. And these are just the tones where the clash is obvious. Then you have the cases like Making Do or the low oscillation on the bottom of Come Back Home, where they just don't blend nearly as well as they should. The tonal choices here are baffling, not just because they stand out as being too close to the front of the mix, but they also undercut the foundation of solid bass guitar and piano grooves that were all the Arkells needed here. And sure, I get why the synthesizers were used. On tracks like Making Do, you can tell they were trying for a War on Drugs-esque swell, but it doesn't blend that well. And while I'm going to place some of the blame on the producers, whoever mic'd the horns on Drake's dad should have been replaced with, well, whoever produced for them on the bridge of Savannah, or his accents on Hung Up, or the sax on Come Back Home. But look, some of this has to fall on the band too, who's gradually pushed the guitars further away from actually driving the melodic grooves. And that's frustrating because, again, there are some solid compositions here with the bombast of Savannah, the bass guitar build and solid driving groove on Making Do, the squonking attitude of Hung Up, the rattling tones of Come Back Home, and A Little Rain, a song for Pete on the bass and guitar, and even some of the drippier pianos on Passenger Seat and Hangs the Moon that mostly come together. Of course, now we have to talk about the lyrics, and here's where we get the one more noticeable improvement from High Noon, in that this album plays it a little bit simpler in the framing and situations, and tends to move away from the preachiness that got under my skin with the last album. There are a little bit more pop-friendly lyrics here. Oh, don't get me wrong, some of the preachiness still comes through on songs like the anti-music industry rant of Hung Up, which is a bit rich coming from what used to be a rock band now going pop for the crossover, but you dig into tracks like Private School and they're actually kind of clever enough to mostly work, half admiring the social circle, but just smart enough to know that these overprivileged twits are not worth their time. One of my favorite lyrics here, they were born on third base, but they thought they hit a triple. Then there's Making Do, which falls into a weird spot, trying to capture the numb helplessness of not being able to help as tragedies strike all around the world seemingly all the time, and yet the inexact pronouns and perspective that seemingly shifts from that of angry, neglected victims back to Kerman makes it feel oddly scattershot and tonally inconsistent, not quite capturing the sarcastic insight that informed tracks like the clearly inspiration of Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA. But really, those are mostly isolated songs. Instead, this album plays through a pretty wide variety of more personal relationship tracks, where Kerman's earnestness really does play to his advantage. Straightforward love songs like And Then Some and My Heart's Always Yours, they connect pretty well, and the heartbreak of tracks like Come Back Home and the awkward breakup fallout through Passenger Seat, that does kind of work. I do have to question Savannah though, which on the hook plays for young love that she wants to see last even despite her sisters telling her that it's not going to, and yet in the end, they're exactly right. He does drift away and it ends on a bit of a sour note, and it's hard to forget that when you have at the very end of the album you have Hangs the Moon where he's promising that he wouldn't drift away or do anything like that. And yet, continuing the tradition of really strong songs about male friendship, I actually really liked A Little Rain, a song for Pete, which plays in very similar territory to Crawling Through Your Window to making that connection. And hell, even though some of the references can feel a tad clumsy, Drake's dad does get to the root of guys who are running wild, who know what they're doing is kind of reckless and stupid, but they're gonna do it anyways. Which the Arkells, they've always had a kind of knack for pulling these songs off. But as a whole, look, there's a part of me that wants to be a lot nicer to this album than I probably should be. I like raw earnestness. I like that the Arkells are at least trying to evolve their sound in a different direction, even if not a direction that I feel flatters their more aggressive, wild tendencies. But those synth tone choices are a consistent turnoff, and when you pair it with lyrics that aren't always consistently strong, for me, it's another light 6 out of 10, and only a recommendation if you're a fan of what they were doing on High Moon. And even then, I'm not sure I would put it up to that level. It's not a bad album, but again, if this is the sound they're looking to show the world now that they finally have US distribution, well, yeah, could have been a lot better. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. Like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I can imagine for Arkells fans, this review might be a tad controversial, but I got the poll up there, so if you guys want to tell me all the ways I'm wrong, I'm happy to hear it. Anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or any other albums coming out that you want me to take a look at, I will try to give them a listen. Till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.